I am happy to see a lot of colleagues. Hi, everyone. Please make sure when we start that you have your coffee hot, very hot, and tall or venti or whatever the name is. You're hearing myself. Okay. All right. Should we start, guys? Steve, I don't know if Steve was able to get connected or not. Steve, if you hear us, please send us something in the chat. Are you able to hear us? We see that you're connected, but we can't hear him. So if it's okay with the rest of the team of the panelists and the moderator today, we're gonna go ahead and start. Hoping that Steve is able to get his sound working for the event. So anyway, good afternoon, everyone. Officially, we're starting right now our very hot coffee break called Are We Ready? We just went straight to the question, right? Are we ready or not to talk about aquifer management between Mexico and the United States? This is a topic that has been resonating around us a lot for a long time. And during drought, now with climate change, very visible impacts, and our surface water availability shrinking, well, are we ready or not to talk about this seriously, I guess? And for that, of course, we invited the best of the border region when it comes to transboundary aquifers between Mexico and the US. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce, if I can move my screen. Is it moving? No. Oh, I know how to move. These are panelists today. Steve is with us, but he's having technical difficulties. Hopefully he's gonna join us in a bit. And I'm going to introduce the moderator for today's event. Please remember that we are live streaming in our YouTube channel. And also this event is being recorded for future reference. And any questions that you may have, please make sure you post them on the chat. We're going to have a Q&A session at the end of the presentations. Well, they're not going to be presentations. It's going to be a discussion on the very important topics. And then we're going to have a moment to interact with the audience through a couple of questions that you will be able to vote. Not vote, I mean, yes, vote. And we will be able to identify the trends of what your thoughts are in different questions related to the topic today. So it's gonna get very, very, very interesting. So stay on, bring your coffee, and let's start. Our moderator today, Dr. Gabriel Eckstein. He's professor of law at Texas A&M University. He is currently serving as director of the internet-based International Water Law Project and is principal of the international consultancy International A2O Solutions. He is the former president of the International Water Resources Association, serves on the executive council of the International Association of Water Law, is an associate editor of the journal Real Research Perspectives, International Water Law, and is a member of the editorial board of the Journal of Water Law. He represented the country of Bolivia versus Chile in the International Court of Justice and in a case of transboundary waters. And he just published the most recent book on transboundary aquifers worldwide. Thank you, Gabriel, for being with us today. And with that, I'm gonna lead you to present our panelists today.
All right, thank you, Rosario. This is a real pleasure, real honor to be here with everybody, and especially with this just absolutely distinguished panel. When Rosario said the best of the best, I mean, she's not kidding. I'm going to start with Sharon Megdal. Sharon is a director of the University of Arizona Water Research Center. She's a member of the Department of Environmental Science faculty, C.W. Modine Neely Endowed Professor, and a distinguished outreach professor at the university. Her goal is to bridge the academic, practitioner, and civil society communities through water policy and management research, education, and cooperative extension programs. And she has served as the PI for all sorts of projects, including the Transboundary Aquifer Assessment Program. Current professional services include serving on the governor's, I believe it's the Arizona Governor's Water Policy Council and the leadership team for the Water and Tribes Initiative in the Colorado River Basin. So wonderful to have Sharon here with us. In addition to Sharon, we have Oscar de la Parra. He's an academic with more than 30 years of experience of study in water and environmental issues on the Mexico-U.S. border. Professionally, he is trained as a civil engineer and has a doctorate in environmental planning from the University of Michigan. He was a research professor at El Colegio de Frontera Norte and has been the federal delegate in Baja California and representative at the Mexican Embassy in Washington for the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources in Mexico. He chairs the Restaremos de Colorado. It's a civil association that operates in Mexicali in water management for the restoration of ecosystems, and he's also a member of the board of directors of the North American Development Bank, NADBank, as representative of Mexican civil society. In addition, we have Dr. Stephen Mummy, who's a professor at the Department of Political Science at Colorado State University, where he specializes in comparative politics with a research emphasis on transboundary water and environmental management along North American boundaries. His current projects include U.S.-Mexico transboundary water diplomacy and U.S.-Mexico environmental cooperation. He is also a non-resident fellow at the U.S.-Mexico Center, the James A. Baker Institute for Public Policy at Rice University. And we also have with us Oscar Ibanez, who has been a professor for more than 35 years, has lots of experience as a consultant in geotechnics, environmental engineering, and public policy in Mexico, the US, and in Canada. He served as chief advisor for the CONAGUA general director and recently as executive director of the state water utilities in Chihuahua. Currently, he works as president of the administrative council for the same institution. And he is former president of the General Assembly of the Users of the Rio Bravo Basin Council and former president of the Chihuahua Regional Section of the Asociación Mexicana de Hidráulica, Mexican Hydraulics Association. He holds a PhD in environmental politics and policy from Colorado State University and a master's degree in environmental engineering from the University of Texas at El Paso. So thank you all panelists for joining us here today. Really appreciate your presence and your engagement. And I'm just going to dive right into it. The point of this panel is to talk about groundwater on the US-Mexico border. And, as you know, we've talked about groundwater for many, many years. Some of us, and I won't point any fingers, have been writing about groundwater on the US-Mexico border. I think it was 25 years ago or more, 30 years ago. So it's been a topic of discussion for quite a long time, but not at the political level. At least not to the extent that many of us think that, that the opportunities might call for it. So the question is to the panelists, are we ready to talk about these shared groundwater resources at that political level between US and Mexico? So let me start with Sharon, please. You're muted.
Yes, I see. So thank you, Rosario, for organizing this session and Gabriel for moderating. It's a pleasure to be here. I've been agitating, trying to encourage this kind of discussion because I think we have to be ready to talk. And I'll use the very collective we, because although policymaking is in the hands of policymakers, they should try to be responsive to what their communities think ought to happen. And they change over time as well, and we can influence them. So I think we have to be ready to talk, and that we can't ignore the role of groundwater. I've been involved in border groundwater matters now for about 15 years. I don't go back 25 years on this. And sometimes it's felt that groundwater is overshadowed by the surface water considerations. And even as recently as Gabriel, and I can't remember if you were there or not, I think you were, and we talked as recently as the 2022 UN UNESCO Groundwater Summit, still people there where groundwater was being discussed. It's a buffer against drought. It's, they're looking at it in a secondary way when groundwater is the primary source of water for so many communities along the border. And yes, it may be relied on even more as we have surface water issues, but we have to recognize the importance of groundwater in a very primary way. And so I think that we have to encourage the discussion to occur at the political level. I think there's the knowledge and expertise upon which to draw to do that. And I'm going to say a little bit more about this later on in an answer to one of the other questions, but we really have to be persistent and patient in that focus. I do want to mention that we have a couple of articles that those of us in the group have either co-authored together or maybe not both, but Elia Tapia is one of our colleagues who's on here, and I suggested that maybe she put some links or some PDFs in the chat. But there are two articles that I'd mention in particular. One of them is a Mummy et al. Article that got published right at the end of the year that really talks about what an approach could look like for groundwater management. And then before that, there was an article that came out of that conference, a conference, not that one, that Rosario's in a book Rosario edited. And so we're kind of all co-conspirators in this. And so it's not just the panelists, but I just want to mention Roberto Salmon, Elia Tapia, Holly Browse, Mary Bell Cruz. And if I've forgotten anybody, it's also the panelists here. So the simple answer is we must be ready to talk, and we've got to get those who are in the policy-making realm to be ready.
All right, thank you, Sharon. Let me turn now to Oscar Ibanez. And same question in terms of are we ready to talk at the political level about shared groundwater? And if yes, also at what scale, at what scope do you think that conversation should be developed?
Probably a couple of notes just to start with. When you're saying that at the political level, sometimes people think in terms just of policy or public policy. But in reality, being the topic so intertwined with political aspects, even if you approach it just from an academic perspective or from the operators, the water utilities perspective, it's embedded with political aspects. So I'm going to say yes. I think the discussion is going on right now, and it's kind of a sideways, because if you try to look at the formal channels, say IBWC or SILA, they might not yet there discussing groundwater on a minute or on formal talks. But yeah, they've been discussing it through forums with citizens, and they having technical discussion on aquifers, and they participate on the academic forums, and they're in a way, they already having the discussion. It's a way of not engaging in formal discussions, but in reality, they're doing it. You know, you sit together with the SILA, IBWC officials, CONAGUA, or Texas Water Commission, or any government, the bureau, are there in academic forums, and the things are being discussed. Um, how far we have water in the aquifers, that they share the aquifers. I mean, we discuss those things. We're doing mapping of groundwater aquifers through universities on both sides of the border, and the maps are there. The data is there. Some of the scenarios that are being constructed are there. The data is there, and it's being shared. So my position is that it's happening. Say for water utilities, I'm just going to use an example. El Paso Water Utilities in Junta Municipal de Aguas in Juarez. They're discussing water quality because they're using the same aquifer. And they share information and what they're doing and whatnot. So again, you can call that a technical discussion, but it's pretty political. I mean, you're sharing information on both sides of the border, real data, and that's the basis of any political discussion. Now, we're not on the level, again, of a minute, because we haven't found the way to do it. I think Steve Mummy can tell us for how many years the possibility of discussing on a political way. I mean, it's been there since the 70s, when there's a minute that says that they're supposed to be discussing groundwater. Then on the 80s, there was an attempt to have a protocol that didn't fly. And then on 2000, the forums, the citizen forums, supposedly will be a way to start discussing groundwater issues. And well, again, we're not there in a way with minutes, but we're there discussing it openly with data and sharing data. So it's kind of a mixed response, I should say.
All right, thank you. You mentioned Steve Mummy, so let me turn to you, Steve, and get your take on this question.
Oh, sure. Well, thank you. And I'm sorry that it took a little while for me to get online. I've got a new laptop computer and I'm still figuring out how to work, how to use it. At any rate, many years ago, I published a piece, a little
Steve,
monograph.
we cannot hear you. Can you put you make sure you have the English channel selected?
I can hear him.
Can you hear? What do I need to do?
I can hear you too. I can hear.
But it's just me then.
Can you hear
can't
me?
hear him either. And
Yeah, just
somebody put
fine.
in the chat. No, several people cannot hear.
Just I'm unmuted, so not quite sure what I need to
Mommy,
do.
Steve, I'm sorry. Would you mind checking if did you select the English channel for you? On the interpretation icon on the bottom of your screen?
Is it right up here?
Look for a little globe, globe, and just globe. I'm sorry.
Okay. Let's see.
Click in there and then choose English and then mute original audio.
Well, let's see. I'm not seeing that little glove anywhere on my screen. Is there some place
at the bottom of your screen, you should be able to see record, show captions, reactions. In there, one of them should be
it's interpretation.
Interpretation.
Yeah, let me see. I can find it.
And I had to unmute the original audio. I think he might have selected or been on the Spanish channel, maybe.
Listen.
It might be.
Okay, does that make a difference?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes,
all right,
we hear
got
you
it.
now.
All right.
Thank
It
you.
just comes up differently on this computer. That's part of the problem that I'm having. So anyway, what I started to say was that back in 1988, I published probably one of the first English language monographs looking at groundwater along the U.S.-Mexican border, and at that time I was rather pessimistic about the opportunity for reaching any kind of an agreement on groundwater, and I think I kind of riskily said that there wouldn't be a groundwater treaty between the United States and Mexico. And the reason was purely political. It had to do with the laws in the United States, the whole disjunction between how the U.S. manages groundwater and how Mexico manages groundwater. It just didn't seem like it was possible to square that circle back then, etc. But I am more optimistic now for multiples of reasons, and Sharon and Oscar have touched on those for sure. But let me just say that there's been a lot of evolution at the international level. We can talk about that maybe a little later. But just in terms of practices and how you engage issues binationally in the area of water, environment, and so forth along the border. So we have some progress. It's also notable that some of our recent international agreements, particularly on the Colorado River, have included groundwater at the discussion level, with the idea that it is a resource that has that performs some kind of common good, that's part of the whole, that needs to be addressed as part of the solution to whatever water issues we have. And then in addition to that, I think that the quality issues have really amplified along the board. There's much more attention, and I think Oscar mentioned that, to quality and the recognition that even though the countries and the parties and the water users and the property rights owners may in fact disagree on so many things, they have a common interest in stewardship of the quality of water. And the utility of the water supply really is conditioned on the quality of the water that's available to whatever users there are along the border, whether those are municipalities, whether they're irrigators, and whomever, ranchers and cattlemen using stock wells and so forth. So so I think that there's more awareness of the need for some kind of a collaboration and cooperation. Finally, I'll just mention that at the level of the International Boundary and Water Commission, we now have commissioners that are much more interested. They're academics, and they're much more aware of this long academic discussion that we've had along the border, and they're guardedly open to doing something, to thinking about it, and I think that that's very constructive. Right now, there's a proposal that is being taken quite seriously, is under discussion at the at CELA, IBWC, US, to create a science advisory board, and that's something that's been discussed for 20 years. It's going back to minute 308 on the Rio. And so now, if that were to happen, one of the things that might very well happen as a result is that such a board might help the commission work with the governments to try and find some kind of mechanism that would allow further discussion and further talks on groundwater along the border. So I just think there's a lot going on right now. I agree with Oscar. There's a lot of awareness that the challenge, of course, is bringing it together and cobbling it into some kind of a proposal that the governments are taking seriously, at least at the level of discussion. So I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Steve. Thank you. So I want to turn to Carlos de la Plata to get your thoughts on this question of are we ready to talk at the political level?
Thank you, Gabriel. So I pretty much agree with a lot of what has been said. I'm wondering who we are when we say we. If you ask me if I am ready, I may say maybe. First thing, I want to know what we mean by political level. And I think Oscar somehow touched on that. I'm going to quote Gemma Smith. She, of course, is new arrival as an assistant professor at the schools of government and policy at U of A. Her thesis has a statement which has caught my attention. International rivers have typically been governed through diplomacy between national governments. Ah, interesting. We have put the cart before the horse. We have started with political institutions rather than the technical.
Carlos,
Yes.
I believe some people can't hear you. I'm sorry. Are you on the Spanish channel?
I did not select. Should I select?
Please select Spanish channel. Thank you. And then mute your original audio, please.
If I am
Thank you.
speaking in English, why would I choose the Spanish channel? Can folks tell
Did
me?
you choose the English?
I have not chosen.
Make sure you select the language on which you want to talk.
Okay. I will choose English.
Okay, now we can hear you.
Okay. So my reflection on her statement is that we in many ways are running right up against the dichotomy that I've always thought of, many people have thought of. One model would be strong national governments that when they rule right up to the border. You have two national governments, such as Mexico and the United States or any other two countries, and strong national governments will tend to oversee and govern rules and policies right up to the border. Of course, when you hit the international border, you have two different policies, two different legal frameworks, cultures, economics, and so forth. And so you need some sort of an interface. And the second model would be a strong interface. And I think that Steve, in some of his comments, is reflecting on the fact that SILA begins the process of somehow making it to be a seamless border. But we need for the environmental, the scientists, the technical experts to actually develop the first draft of what would be, and then the politicians may get into the act. So when we talk about the political level, I would also say, let's just be clear about this. Are we talking about elevating a model so that the politicians on both countries create the governance framework so that sound policy can take place? And so my answer would be yes, I am ready for that. But if what we're saying is, are we ready for the political level? And by that we mean politicians expressing their perception of what their constituents are wanting to hear, then I would say no. And I'm of basic training, I am an engineer, and I remember distinctly people telling me when I was very young, oh, you're a good engineer, you only have one problem. You are always going to answer to a politician. And in that respect, no, I'm not ready for that. I think we need to first really iron out exactly what we want before we actually make the politicians begin to talk about this. And I'll stop there.
All right, interesting. I guess the concern about the politicization of the groundwater on the border is one of the concerns we need to think about. Let's move on because we're going to run out of time. I think that these conversations can go on for hours. But just if we were to move forward on developing some kind of cooperative mechanism, and I'm not sure what this mechanism would be, if it's at that top political level or somewhere a little bit lower, but some mechanism that focuses on cooperation on groundwater on the border between U.S. and Mexico. What might it look like? And if you want it at the top level, that's fine, or the middle or the low level, whichever one you think is best. What might it look like? What would be its scope, roles, formalities, and so on? So start with Sharon again.
So I don't know if I always want to be first, but you called on me. I think a number of things have already come to the forefront in this, just in the answers to the first question. And so this question about scale and scope and levels of authority, and even bringing, is it top down, bottom up? Groundwater is very local. And in fact, water, even when it's transported, it becomes very local once it gets to where it's being used. And the situations differ a lot. And so, the real question is it going to be a bottom up that's driven by the need, the desire of the users of the groundwater to come up with some kind of framework? Or is it, going to be top down? People don't like top down, but sometimes the political folks have to establish the framework for the bottom up situation to be developed and implemented. So it's kind of like all of the above. I want to kind of connect this discussion to challenges we're having right now within the state of Arizona. In the introduction, it was mentioned that I'm the Governor's Water Policy Council, and we were put together at our first meeting just over a year ago, and we were charged by the governor, we're a group of about 40 people, to come up with recommendations on a few things, and one of which was what to do about rural groundwater, where there are no regulations on extraction of groundwater. I mean, basically none. And it's turning out to be quite difficult to get agreement on a framework for doing that. In fact, I'll be going to a meeting tomorrow at 11:30 my time to hear an update on the debates going on at the legislature. These are hard issues. What tends to happen, what I've observed, and this is also based on looking at what's going on in groundwater in the West, where we face water scarcity, it's a fossil groundwater, is that if some areas will come up with their own solutions, they'll even charge for water, they'll tax themselves, they'll figure it out. And so I think the real question is whether or not the locals want to do something and whether the top down has given them the ability, the capacity, the legal standing to do that. I want to just also build very quickly on some of what Carlos said about you've got each country and a strong country like governance. In the United States, we have such divergence of how groundwater is managed and such difference of opinion about the role of the federal government in that, I'm going to come back to this at the end or be repetitive. And that is, we have to have the dialogue. And that's why I said, yes, we can't wait to talk. Because if we don't, we're going to run up against the fact that in the United States, we don't like the federal government telling the states what to do. The federal government does not have a centralized role in managing groundwater like it does in Mexico. And so sometimes it ends up being a non-starter if the federal government says to the states, we want to talk about regulating groundwater in your jurisdiction. But again, we have to talk about that. And even within the states, we have sometimes differing situations. So I really think it's urgent that we have this dialogue. And it's hard to do it when you have so many layers and so many parties involved. But I guess in a sense, I agree with Carlos saying, yes, we have to have it, and we have to have the NGOs and the scientists involved, but we must have the political people involved as well, because we don't want to do all that work and then just hit a brick wall. So I'll leave it at that.
So thank you. So I want to turn to Oscar now, but sort of building on what Sharon was saying, you know, at least the part where she highlighted the fact that Mexico has a fairly centralized system, and in the US, it's a very decentralized system. I mean, how can you develop a cooperative mechanism? And at what level could you even conceptualize some kind of mechanism to cooperate over the shared groundwater?
Well, I think Sharon said it very well. Groundwater is so local compared to the impact of surface water. Groundwater, I mean, the characteristics, the problems, the use, it's very different depending on which aquifer you're talking about. So I think that's the first thing that you need to consider in terms of trying to build up something. But I will say that the first step that we will have to have, and I'm using here the experience on the treaty, even the Convention of 1906 and the Treaty of 1944. I think it will have to happen some sort of contextual circumstance that will happen, you know, like a black swan type of thing. But if by then we don't have a baseline of information, then we won't be able to do anything with the opportunity. So I think we need to start with the basics. We need to start sharing monitoring data on monitoring volume, quality, and the interaction of groundwater and surface water on every aquifer. I think those are the basics. If we start doing that, monitoring and then some modeling with that data, then when opportunity comes, we will be able to do something. Once we start monitoring and modeling, again, volume, quality, and the interaction of groundwater and surface water, that creates the need to share something, to build on something. Because right now, I mean, we speculate. And there's no way we will build on something either for fighting or for cooperating without the right data. And so I think the first step is make sure that we build that baseline. And that has to do with more cooperation with the academia, even the official government entities, just sharing the data that they're already collecting. And out of that, we're going to build something. It's not going to be easy. But it wasn't easy in 1906 and 1944. You had to have some contextual circumstances that evolve and make it happen. But without data, it's not going to happen. I'm just going to stop right now. Remember the All-American Canal? The interaction of surface water and groundwater, it's obvious. But what happened with the Homeland Security and then the lining of the canal? Well, it had an impact, but we didn't have anything to prove or discuss over that. And then what happened with the earthquake that destroyed the infrastructure of irrigation on the Mexican side, that prompted the minute to work on cooperation on storage on the US side. Something that before that, nobody wanted to put it on the table. But when opportunity struck, then the possibility of building on something, data and possibilities came up. So I think it's going to be the same with groundwater. But again, we need to share data.
So, Sharon, if it's a very quick comment. Yeah.
I asked Gabriel for permission to interject because I just have to here. The Transboundary Aquifer Assessment Program is designed to produce the data. It's been working on a limited number of aquifers, but that is designed to produce data to get people on the same page as to the status of the groundwater and the aquifers. So I want to just note that we have something in place. It's not along the whole border. California opted out of participating on the US side. The other thing I want to say is that I've been involved in that since its inception at the US Congress. California opted out, in my view, in part because they didn't want academic studies to necessarily interfere with what was going on. They opted out of the Transboundary Aquifer Assessment Program because the lining of the All-American Canal was pending. And so I just, a lot of people don't have that history, but I do. And I just wanted to mention that. Thank you, Gabriel, for letting me interject.
Sure. So let me turn to Steve, because Oscar was talking about the need for data, and I'm just wondering if it's almost a chicken and egg question. Do you need the institution to facilitate the exchange of data, or do you first start with producing the data? I mean, what's the institutional mechanism? Because we can produce data at the academic levels individually, but don't we need something to facilitate the exchange, right? Do we need a mechanism?
Well, we do need a mechanism, and precisely because it's an international boundary. I think one of the things that, just to take Sharon's point about groundwater being profoundly local, that's true, but the paradox of an international boundary is that it's not entirely local in your political jurisdiction. It really it involves another party, and so whereas groundwater basins in other parts of the country may be more local, that's not true along the international border. And so in this context, you have to have two to tango, and you have to really be able to have some kind of a mechanism that at least initiates a dialogue where problems are evident. Now, who raises the problem, I think, is a really interesting question, and that's where I think Sharon is onto something, in that local communities have to recognize that they've got a problem, that somehow they need to cooperate. But we have the IBWC, we have SELA, and that's, I think, a very appropriate and adequate mechanism with which to initiate these kinds of, or to at least mediate these kinds of discussions. It doesn't have to come with the heavy hand of the federal government. So I think that's important to note. It may seem that way because these are federal agencies subject to their foreign ministries. And I know that along the border, you'll find a lot of finger pointing at the IBWC on the US side, and on the Mexican side as looking at SELA as well. But when it comes to just having a fora to discuss issues, to raise issues, to bring people together, I think that's really important. We also have other fora that could be used through the La Paz Agreement and some of our binational environmental area, particularly where water quality is concerned. But at some point, and the La Paz Agreement favors the IBWC in this, and basically says IBWC in the area of water, transboundary water, IBWC is the agency that's most responsible. I think but we have these mechanisms. So I think when problems are identified, then being able to ask the commission to at least facilitate some cross-border discussion. That's really what happened with the Transboundary Aquifer Assessment Act, and it's just a great model. I mean, the principal engineers really worked in detail through the kinds of equities and the participatory opportunities that each country should have here in trying to get on the same page with respect to the analytics, with respect to the way that the research was going to be operationalized and conducted, and the way it was going to be essentially validated for the governments, and that's what gives it such resonance here. So I think that's evidence that we do need these mediating mechanisms that allow communities, when they see a problem, when they're concerned, and I think a lot of them are concerned these days, particularly in our urban areas. They're very concerned about the quality of water, et cetera, and sometimes the availability too. And so I think that making that work better, and I think that's one of the things that the group that Sharon and I and others have been here on the panel have been working with. We've been really trying to figure out what's an appropriate sort of avenue to take to facilitate these conversations along the border without imposing any solution, et cetera. So yeah, we do need the mediating mechanism, but we really kind of have it.
So let me move to Carlos and maybe sort of ask you the question: do you agree we have mechanisms? Sharon and the others have pointed to CLI, BWC with the engineers report, the La Paz agreement, the TAP. Are these the mechanism, the right mechanisms, or is one of them better than another in terms of how we manage cooperation over groundwater?
Let's use them all. let's just use them all. I couldn't agree more with what all have said, but I want to point you in the direction of maybe what we're talking about. Yes, groundwater is local. Everybody said that. I will say it also. Yes, there needs to be baseline information. Yes, it needs to be bottom up and not top down. And so I think that governance issue that Sharon touched on, and the fact that we have an International Boundary and Water Commission, those are all elements. And so hidden in plain sight is the fact that what we are arguing in favor of is for everyone to step away and let the people that are affected be the ones that determine how to solve the problem of an aquifer. When Stephen says that it's local, but the paradox is that in an international border, it's not completely local, I say let's get rid of the international border as far as at least managing the aquifer is concerned. So I do think that we need to look at models, and I'll start with one model of dialogue that I think was really interesting. And it took place, I'd say about 15 years ago when the US and Mexico started talking about what is now known as Minute 319. Then Mexico had no idea how you would manage the Colorado River on the US side of the border, and as it took 5 years of conversations before it was signed. It was signed on November 20. Viva la Revolución, November 20, 2012. It was signed in the Hotel Coronado in California. And over the course of 5 years, I think the people that were involved in it will tell you that the factor that made it possible was just the time, the dinners, the tequila, and the trust that came out of the process. And yes, Oscar is right. Data sharing. It took a while for Mexico to understand exactly what was going on in the U.S. regarding the management of the Colorado River. It took several trips to go and see the small dams, to go and see how Lake Powell functioned and so forth. It took a while for folks at the upper basin to understand what the Delta needed. And so just the model of beginning to use large quantities of data, which seems now that we're ready for that, it drives me to something that I would say will scare the heck out of both federal governments. But yes, Steve is right. We don't need the heavy hand of the feds. In fact, we actually need them to leave the room. We need them to start acknowledging the fact that a strong border where sovereignty is the key word really gets in the way of a good model for managing something that's local. It just happens to be local, international at the same time. Who has a good model? Eleanor Ostrom has a good model. This is not the first time I've said this. Governing the commons tells you that you first need to have clear boundaries of what you're managing. And I think that we can have with data clear boundaries of what the aquifer that we're trying to manage, where it lies. You also need, she said, to match the rules of governing with the use that is dictated by local needs. She also said that those affected by the rules participate in modifying the rules. In other words, nothing about us without us. Rulemaking rights of community members are respected by outside authorities. This is another principle. And so, to the extent that we are able to convince the International Boundary and Water Commission, which I agree with Stephen, is in one of its best moments where they are seeing clearly what the needs are. If we are able to persuade them or tell them we've got your back, now is a good time. 2024, there will be a new administration on both sides of the border at the start of 2025. Maybe it's a time for them to begin to talk about a small pilot, a pilot model that allows both federal governments to kind of decree some sort of a no war zone and have the locals with a lot of data. Of course, we need a little bit of an enhancement in terms of the CETA model. I will go back to this intermediate institution, international institution, but it needs to be broader in scope, to have greater funding, so that they can begin to develop a model. Because at the end of the day, I think we're going to run up with exactly what Stephen said. Back in the what was it, Steve? In the 1990s, 1980s that you wrote that first article?
Yeah.
And it's just, I was able to run into that when I was in Washington, D.C. There was no way that we could begin a dialogue with formal authorities. And so let's leave it to the locals. Let's just have this transparent, data latent system that allows for rules for governing something that is common. And I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you. I've got a list of other questions here, but I think this is such a rich conversation already, and we already have a few questions in the chat, so maybe we should just move to the audience. Rosario.
So Gabriel, could I hate to be disruptive, but I really would like to say something to reinforce what Carlos just said in a very positive way. And that is, I give a lot of talks in a lot of different settings, and I keep emphasizing that what is most important to resolving issues is process. You know, we can have data and we can have engineering and we can have money even, but process is so important. And I've written a little case study, it's not published yet, where I actually look to IBWC as a really well-functioning mechanism. And I think we ought to say that sometimes we locals, when we're living with something, we know both the pluses and we know the warts, and we don't necessarily know that we have such a fine example here of a functioning mechanism. And if you look around the world, there aren't that many examples of something like IBWC. But the reason I wanted to say something is I list 7 factors. And later on, if I have a concluding remark, I can bring them all into one thing. But one of them is eating with your partners. Now, I didn't say drinking tequila with your partners, but that point of having relationships and getting to know people and so forth is so important. And all those other things fit around that. So I just wanted to thank Carlos for maybe having me insert drinking tequila in future talks when I talk about this.
All right. Well, good. Let's turn to some of the questions here that we have. I see one in particular here that Deborah placed on here, and I'm going to read this, but also I want to maybe extract a little bit from this. How would the panelists assess the linkages between local communities and higher level transboundary mechanisms like IBW-CELA in an effective manner? But I'm actually wondering, Carlos, whether you're suggesting that we don't have that linkage. Let's just leave it to the locals to decide, or do we need the linkage? And if we do, then what's the mechanism? And let's start with you, Carlos.
Yeah, and in fact, I'll point you to an exercise that CELA IWC had undertook in 2015. It's called Minute 320. Minute 320 is based on the Tijuana River. There's a little problem there of sewage spills. I don't think you've heard of it because it's only been going on for about 50 years. And it really pisses the hell out of people in San Diego that for some reason, there can't be a solution. And the solution from Mexico City and from Washington, D.C. is just not able to happen. And so Minute 320, the commission, what they did was decide that they would create like an umbrella organization called the Binational Core Group. And then they would appoint folks in local governments on both sides of the border, sit them at the same table, have the same data, and begin a discussion that would be honored by CELA and IWC. But the commissioners would not impose. Something that I think Stephen touched on, you don't dictate, you actually have the locals begin a process. And once that's done, let's sign it in a minute. So I do think that there needs to be linkages, but probably at a different level when you have the technical and the policy framework developed by locals, and only the diplomatic and the formalization occurs at the federal level.
Steve or Oscar?
Sure.
Sharon?
Well, let me pitch in really quick and just mention that in the article that we wrote in Water Economics and Policy, one of the things we're proposing is a framework arrangement that would in fact allow for this bottom up and sort of local engagement and the definition of both problems and solutions. I think that hang on here, got a problem on my screen.
We can hear you well and see you well.
Okay, fine. I think that the idea of creating just a broad kind of open-ended mechanism that essentially addresses the one problem that we're always going to have here, which is that the structure of binational relations requires some kind of federal endorsement. It just simply requires that. So you could have a lot of dialogue going on across the border, even with some of the security mechanisms in place, et cetera, made it a little more difficult in some cases to do that. You can initiate that without any kind of federal approval. But there's this need to have some kind of a formal mechanism that puts the imprimatur of legitimacy on these kinds of dialogues that are across the boundary. And so one of the things we've argued here is that the time has come to create that kind of mechanism, and you can call it a groundwater agreement. It's just an agreement to have a dialogue and to have discussions at the local level, and then to basically treat the problem not as a border-wide problem, but as a series of specific problems along the border in which the local parties and stakeholders have again this leading role in defining the problem and considering solutions. I will just add one other thing that we haven't really mentioned here, and that is that one of the issues that will come up in almost all of these situations is how do we finance the infrastructures or whatever, whether it's the studies, the infrastructure, whatever that needs to go into solutions. And that's where I think the federal governments can play a role in supplementing the states, because the states will always balk at funding. They have plenty on their plate, and that's where I think we could use a greater federal support for really delving into these situations and enabling people, really creating the basis by which people can who are affected can raise issues and then suggest solutions, knowing that they have support for that, or at least they have resources to draw on for that. And I think that's also where SELA IBWC can perhaps come into play and be helpful, as well as other federal agencies with a binational remit. So EPA, SEMARNAT, et cetera. So I think that this idea of a framework agreement, I think that the time has really come. IBWC is already doing it in other areas. We've seen that in Minute 320 on the Tijuana River. And that's something that shouldn't be, I mean, I say this kind of gratuitously, but it shouldn't be all that controversial because it's an empowering mechanism. It's an empowering mechanism for local communities. And I think if it's presented that way, then we may get some traction on it.
Thank you, Steve.
Let me say something real quick.
Real quick, Klaus script. Yeah.
Yeah, real quick. The experience that we have with the El Paso Air Quality Task Force, air quality, talking about on air basing, and then the El Paso del Norte Water Task Force, I think enabled to tackle particular issues where you can have a bottom-up approach with the participation of SELA, IBWC, but in a non-formal setting. So they don't compromise negotiations or whatever. But that level of interaction, I think that creates the linkages between the grassroots or the locals that are involved, the stakeholders, with the top decision officials that will have to actually manage to do something with the interaction and the dialogue. I think those models can be useful for particular aquifers or regions or issues that we need to deal with.
All right, thank you. What I think we want to do now is actually get some of the audience to participate in surveys. So Rosario, you're going to post something?
Yes, Saul, Dr. Arciniega has 3 questions for the audience, so we can get your thoughts pretty quickly. We will be able, Saul, are you ready to share your screen? Yeah, he's sharing his screen. You can use that on your cell phones or the links if you want to use your desktop. The links will be shared in the chat. Or use your cell phones. There are 3 questions. The links, if you want to use your laptop, click on the link in the chat. They're English and Spanish, I'm sorry. And please go into them. We're going to give you 1 or couple of minutes. I mean, they're pretty deep, intense questions designed to get your thoughts. Because we have a big audience today, so we want to be able to kind of monitor what are your thoughts related to the topic and also to the answers of our panelists today, which are, we can be here forever, I agree, talking about this, but it's been really open-eye discussion that, you know, sometimes you think that you know what the answer is, and then you ask the people and then you get something different. So surprises. I'm going to stop talking so you can concentrate. And then we're going to show the results here pretty quickly, and we can have the panelists to comment on what we're seeing. There are just 3 questions. We don't have that much time, but I really want to get your, you know, your sense of what is the audience actually feeling or thinking about these 3 questions. I can start seeing those bars moving. How many do we have so far, Saul? I see that you have already
¿Me
stuff there
escucha,
going
Rosario?
on. Yes,
Llevamos 24.
24 answers. Can we start looking at the first question? And Gabriela, I'll give it up. Yeah, he's updating. So the first question is, and it's in English and Spanish, so it's easier. You can read it. Do you think we are ready to manage transboundary groundwater resources at binational level? Not so much. That's what the audience thinks mostly.
But there is an opportunity.
But there's an opportunity, exactly. We're close. We are very ready. You know, 2nd place, and we're far away. It's not, but you know, the trend is somehow we are getting close.
Maybe we should ask our panelists if anybody has an opinion, because it seemed like some of you were maybe a little more eager than what the audience was in terms of getting to the point of, you know, politically managing groundwater binationally.
So I think there might be some difficulty though in discerning what's meant between the 2nd and the 3rd. So if you combine those 2, that
But,
shows we're getting there.
right.
And that's not surprising to have that be the dominant response.
Okay. Anybody else have any comments?
Vamos a tener una reunión.
If not, maybe we can go to the second question.
Okay, thanks.
Let's go to the second, Saul. Do you think the route should be a border-wide approach, such as a formal agreement between the 2 countries? And we got a winner saying a combination of formal agreement and a case-by-case basis, which is pretty much what you guys kind of addressed. Like, let the people decide, right? The locals, let the locals decide. But the interesting here, and Gabriel, I'm going to give it. I'm sorry, I'm interfering with your moderator.
It's okay.
I'm sorry. I'm just very charged. But you know, the framework is important there too. I mean, there's a framework there that could be worked at a formal level, and then leave it open at a local scale too. So both scales might be necessary as well. Anyway, I'll leave it to the panelists.
That's what's not quite clear here when you think of a combination of formal and agreement and case by case. Was the audience thinking of a framework as the formal at the border wide, or were they thinking something more substantive or not? But that would be interesting. We should do more of these polls and kind of parse these out in more detail, because this is interesting. Panelists, I don't know if you have any comments on this particular one, the second question.
Yeah, I think that you know that the key to bear in mind is that you have to have that legitimating imprimatur of the federal government to engage in these local dialogues. So it's not quite chicken and egg here. You have to get that formality going. I mean, that's what happened with the La Paz agreement, for example. You created the formality of engaging in these discussions, and that allowed for things to bubble up in the form of local task forces and particular problem identification and across a variety of environmental media in affecting both countries along the boundary. So I think you have to have that, et cetera. But once that's in place, and once that kind of loose legitimating framework is in place, then the emphasis shifts to the locals. Then the locals are in charge, et cetera. And I think that at that point, then they have the authority that they need to kind of, you know, bridge the border, bridge the boundary, and engage in these problem-solving discussions.
All right, thank you. Maybe we can go to the third chart.
Yes. So can we go to the third question? Wow. What obstacles or challenges do you see are still present in the topic of shared groundwater resources at binational level? And we've mentioned that, well, you've mentioned that governance disparities, water rights differences, and there was a comment there by Eddie from TCEQ, Eddie Modero. He mentioned that as well. Lack of data, which has been addressed. Fears and misconceptions. You know, it's number 4.
Yeah.
There's a lot of disinformation, I guess. The status quo seems to be more convenient. The 1944 treaty does not cover groundwater. That's the least. Your thoughts?
Panelists?
I should say that these third questions had the most participants, and it's weird because it talks about the challenges. And
three answers.
Yeah, you can put up to 3 answers, but this is still a pretty intensive response, I think.
Yeah. Now, I would say that if we look at fears and misconceptions, and we research history, as Sharon mentioned, California stepped out because of fears and misconceptions. And of course, if you have fears and misconceptions, then you don't have data. I'm caught by the fact that we are not acknowledging the political sovereignty that makes institutions kind of step back and not engage in this. But that, you know, it's interesting because governance disparities seems to be right on top. Maybe I don't know.
I just want to add a point of clarification here about the treaty. The treaty has been extended to at least allow the governments to have discussions on groundwater. That was the significance of Minute 242 back in 1973. Now, how that I think that there is a need for further authority, but again, we are seeing groundwater mentioned and included in a number of these recent agreements, particularly on the Colorado River, Minute 319 to Minute 323. all of which tend to reinforce the authority of the International Boundary Water Commission to at least address the issue. So I don't think that there's a lot of controversy now about whether IBWC can address this issue. Obviously, the governments have to be on board, and there'll be a lot of discussion there. But I think that the baseline sort of authority, technical authority, is available to the governments. Yeah.
Well, we have a sort of related question in the chat from Raul. Are the federal governments even interested in transboundary aquifers or having information about transboundary aquifers? Or is this more so of a local issue? Is this more the local governments and the local communities that are interested rather than the federal governments?
I think Raul's point regarding that there's not enough interest in Mexico, I agree with that in many ways, because locals are not, the important factor. In Mexico, it's La Comisión Nacional del Agua, and CONAGUA knows for a fact that it cannot control all of the hundreds of thousands of wells and the amount of water that is extracted from each and every one of the wells. And so it would not mind if we didn't know more about what is going on. The counterpart to what California did was what Mexico did, in the sense of, let's just leave sleeping dogs slumber.
Raul has his hand up, and then I'd like to say something. Gabriel, do you want to call on Raul?
Yeah, Raul, very quickly, please. Raul? Yeah.
¿Me escuchan?
Sí.
Yes.
Okay.
Very quickly, please.
Yo pienso que el problema no está totalmente en Conagua. El problema está por encima de Conagua, en donde están los principales funcionarios, no los servidores públicos. De acuerdo a la Constitución mexicana, los servidores públicos son, por ejemplo, el director general de Conagua, pero los funcionarios públicos son el poder federal, el poder legislativo. Y es ahí donde tenemos francamente el problema. El recurso agua, que es vital para todo el mundo, para esto, ese grupo de personas funciona o se acuerdan solo en épocas electorales, desafortunadamente. Pienso que este esfuerzo que ustedes han realizado, Rosario, Gabriel, Sharon, es muy importante porque los cambios se deben dar ahí, aquí, a ese nivel de conocimiento, es donde tenemos que obligar a los funcionarios públicos a darse cuenta que es importante tomar en serio esta problemática, para lo cual definitivamente es importante considerar a la gente local. Gracias.
Thank you. Thank you, Raul. Sharon, you had a quick word?
Well, the quick word is really that like there are asymmetries in governance, like and laws, there's also budgetary asymmetries, even at the federal level, to do this kind of work and convene. And so I'm just gonna kind of, my last comment here will be that if we have a local area where the people feel ready and want to see some groundwater management done on a binational basis, I would encourage them to get noisy and to be consistently asking for the funds and the mechanisms, because it takes a long time to set up these binational meetings. Gilbert Anayas I'm not sure if he's still on, but Gilbert knows it sometimes takes months just to get a meeting together to plan a binational meeting. We're trying to do that in our Arizona-Sonora border area to develop a binational work plan. And so we could just get so bogged down. So this idea of a pilot, this idea of something to get things going, I think if we have that community, if we have that situation, then the locals, again, I think the people will be responsive if they want to have the dialogue and the data collection and all that. So I'm just gonna
Thank you.
encourage people to encourage people.
Yeah. So maybe, Rosario, we should wrap up now, and maybe I'll give sort of a very quick few thoughts that, you know, I find this dialogue, this conversation fascinating. We never have enough time, and we're always running out of time, and this is not an exception. You know, for the question, are we ready? It seems like all of us here are ready. You know, are the politicians ready? Are we ready to have the politicians engage on these issues? I think there's some concerns there because maybe we don't have all the ideas that we want them to have in front of them. And I don't remember if it was Carlos or Oscar who said that we need to sort of develop a bit more the concept of what it is exactly that we want. But I did hear in here, and this is part of Steve's paper, which I completely agree with, about the idea that maybe we need to give some kind of guidance. And is this in terms of a framework agreement or framework document? But also at the same time, most of you said, this is all you said, this is a local issue. So we have to give the space to the local communities to engage and make and have the opportunity to make decisions. So my opinion on this, and I'm going to throw out my opinion here, is I do agree that we can have a framework agreement. I actually think we need a framework agreement without mandates. I think a number of you have said that, without mandates, but rather I would call them guardrails. Process. A number of you mentioned process. If we create process, not requirements, not rules, not specific numbers of allocation, but process for consideration, process for getting it together, even to the point of allowing the local communities to engage in their own formal agreement or informal arrangement underneath that umbrella. And just to bring this up, I wrote about this about 10 years ago.
Out of the picture, okay?
And we've got some folks who need to mute their microphones, please. But I wrote about this about 10 years ago from a legal perspective. So which is a little bit of a different perspective than I think some of the policy and the management perspective you heard here. But I think this is all meshes really well. The general idea is that at least we are ready, but I think we need to do a bit more homework. The idea that we can develop some kind of a structure that guides the local communities to achieve their own decisions, whether those be formal decisions or informal decisions, but a process for cooperation at that local level. But the federal kind of relationship facilitates that local relationship, and I think that's sort of the sense I got from the panelists here today. So with that, I'm going to turn back to Rosario for I think to end the show.
We don't want to go. I don't want to go anywhere. Keep it going. Thank you. Thank you for the audience. Really, it was very, we were very pleased to how many people signing for this topic, which means something, right? Which also means something. I mean, we might be somehow ready to get into that discussion with the big guys up there. I want to thank the panelists. I mean, this is so engaging. After this coffee break, now we need a beer because we have a lot of work to do. It seems like it's not enough. what we've done. So we need to keep pushing. So that's our work. And that's what the forum is all about. Keep pushing towards these topics. So thank you everyone for signing in today. We're going to have this recording available pretty soon. We're going to work on briefs, infographics, everything that needs to be disseminated with the border community and beyond in terms of groundwater in the border. So thank you again. Thank you, Gabriel, Sharon, Carlos, Oscar, Steve. You know, I call Sharon my dear Yoda, but today you really are all my dear Yodas. So thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thanks so much.
Gracias. Gracias a todos.
Buena tarde.
Gracias, Gilbert. By the way, there were some questions out there in the panel, in the chat that we weren't able to answer. We're going to send back comments to you. I promise. There were good comments there. So I know there are a couple of bots taking notes. So we're gonna grab those and share with you later. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Gilbert,
Rosario.
Alfredo,
No,
Good
everybody.
to see you,
thank
Gilbert.
you. Good seeing you all.
Eddie, thank you. Deborah, Luis. Randy, good to see you as always. Elia, thank you for sharing those documents. I really need a beer. I need it. Or a
It's
tequila,
only-
Sharon.
it's only
You wanted
three-
to get a tequila.
Yeah, it's only 3:35 here in Tucson. It's a little too early for that.
But since you mentioned it from the beginning. Actually, it was
Well,
Oscar who
it's
mentioned at the
Carlo-
beginning.
Yeah, it was Carlos's suggestion.
It was Carlos. That's true.
All right. If you could share some of those chat, that would be good because you have saving chat